All right. Hello, everybody. Good morning and welcome to National Tile Day. We are so excited that you are joining us for the first live webinar of today, Environment, Health, Wellness, and Alleviating Germaphobia, Ceramic Tile and the Future of Green Building. Now say that 5 times fast. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few items. This program is CEU accredited by AIA and NKBA. Please check your screen for a link to the online form that you need to submit to receive your credits or request a certification of participation. For more questions or more information, please contact conference@coverings.com. All attendees are in listen-only mode. You can submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the question section of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will share with the presenters during the Q&A at the end of the presentation, getting to as many as time allows. If you are having problems connecting or other issues, often closing the window and starting a new window will fix the problem. If you are having problems with your audio, call the number on your invitation to listen via phone. The audio pin for this session is 60153# or hashtag. Make sure to visit the website to take advantage of the other great live webinars scheduled for today, along with updated on-demand content, a virtual tile trivia happy hour, and other exciting features, all in celebration of National Tile Day. I would now like to introduce our presenters. Bill Greasy, Director, Standards Development and Sustainability Initiatives, Tile Council of North America, and Dan Marvin, Senior VP Operations, Iron Rock. Take it away, gentlemen.
All right, thanks, Allie, and we'll jump right into it. I think Allie, you covered the continuing ed information, so it's all there, and so we'll just jump right in. As Allie mentioned in the introduction, we're happy to be here today to talk about green building and the sustainability landscape in general. A lot of it has carried on from years past. Obviously, we're in a different time, so there are a lot of new elements of sustainability and green building, particularly in green building, that we anticipate for the future. So we're happy to walk through those with you just from an industry standpoint, where we feel we are and how we're well positioned to tackle on the years ahead. And so what we're going to do, what we hope you take away from this session today, is first and foremost understand the industry. We have some really valuable tools in place that will benefit those interested in designing with tile, interested in specifying tile, particularly to meet green building project requirements, starting with our industry standards, and not just standards, but our inherent properties of the sustainability benefits of tile and how those translate into minimum expectations in our standards. And then we'll touch on some of the transparency tools we have, both environmental transparency and transparency around what products are made out of as they translate to human health and wellness. And then we'll round out our talk today. You'll be able to walk away with some insights on kind of where we are. There's a whole new element of health and wellness, as you can imagine, with the pandemic. And so it's opened our eyes a little bit into some things that are going to be important to the marketplace, important to specifiers, not just the tile, but interior surfaces in general. So just to start, just to set the stage for our conversation, you should know sustainability, and again, green building in particular, the landscape is vast, as I'm sure many of you have experienced to this point. It's not just the environment when we talk energy and atmosphere or resources anymore. It's also what products are made out of, how that product ingredient information is communicated. It's also the general well-being of occupants of interior spaces, everything from what they're exposed to with the product to how the product is maintained, especially today, how the products are maintained from a sanitation standpoint, and how all of this translates into how products are specified and evaluated and ultimately integrated into green buildings in their design, architecture, and use. All of this comes together with the backdrop of increased consumer awareness in general, and what's important to society is more mainstream today than ever as it relates to green building. So we'll walk through all of this, and just to start, to keep in mind some key components to consider when we talk about sustainability. Obviously, there's the environment. That's kind of what kicked off this whole green building discussion years ago, and almost around the same time, not too far into the efforts, human health became just as important, if not more, than the environment when it comes to what designers and specifiers look for in products and how products work together. So it's not just the products themselves, it's products and how they're integrated into systems and into buildings and their design and use. And also, as I alluded to on the previous slide, the suppliers, what kind of information are they providing and how transparent is this information regarding the products, what they're made out of, how they impact the environment and human health. And then tying this all together are some of the drivers. Some of the main drivers are, of course, green building standards, green building rating systems, but also integrated, a lot of these requirements are integrated into law and building codes. So we'll touch on that a little bit. And then finally, just underlying with all this is just increasing consumer awareness around the environment, around human health. And so let's try to paint a picture. And in doing so, from an environmental standpoint, it's important to understand where we are and where we're going. But first, to do so, it's interesting to look back and think about kind of how we got here and take a walk down memory lane. Environmentalism, as we know it today, can be attributed to the late 60s, early 70s, when a couple of accidents that really had harm on the environment spawned new initiatives such as Earth Day in 1970. And in the decades that followed, you just saw a general increase in social awareness on environmental issues. This inherently translated not just to everyday life, but also the buildings and the architecture that we're exposed to every day. I think I saw a study one time that humans spend the vast majority of their life indoors. I think it was something incredible, like 90% of their time alive is spent indoors. So of course, the products and the buildings we come into contact with are important, and also their impact on the environment. Naturally, as we progress toward the close of the 20th century, green building as we know it was kind of established, and it's carried on into the 21st century now 2 decades in. Not just global warming concerns, but again, as I'll get to on the next slide, human health concerns. But all of these kind of gelled into this idea of green building standards, green building rating systems, which, as you can imagine, changed the market for ceramic tile, but all other building products. It's really a new marketplace that we're dealing with today, and it continues to change every year. Similarly, on the health side, if we take a look back on where we are, it wasn't too far after environmental issues took off in green building that health issues also took back, most notably early on the subject of VOC emissions. And this is interesting to look back. The subject of VOCs came to light in the Clinton administration with his executive order. Within one of those orders was greening of the White House. And that became an interesting case study because shortly thereafter, you saw the formation of the U.S. Green Building Council. And almost right off the bat with LEED and other green building rating systems, VOC and VOC emission criteria were integral. So this was the first departure from just not environmental issues, but also human health issues. And then as we got through the early 2000s, you saw this translate over or carry on over into the schools and how we're designing schools. State of California had a big role in that leadership. And then just recently, 5 or 6 years ago, you saw the Formaldehyde Act signed into law, where federally we were restricting formaldehyde limits in wood-based composite products. And you saw the EPA really crank down and enforce those issues. So again, it wasn't just voluntary. You saw some of this written into law. And in the background of all of this, you saw increasing consumer demands, not just for the environmental aspect, but also for reporting of health information around products. And you're definitely seeing that spike today with the pandemic in the landscape. So as we look back through all of this, we've evolved through different societal milestones. We've evolved through different governmental administrations. I think we're at a transition point now where you're going to see even more green building initiatives in light of the landscape overall, not just the pandemic, but also with a change in leadership. So one thing has been a constant: building interiors, as we talk green building, health and environment have been constant throughout all of this. Perhaps most of the attention on green building, as far as consumers are concerned, have been around the interiors. So ceramic tile being largely an interior product, also on the exteriors, but you can imagine the influence that all of this has in our positioning and our communications as an industry. So let's shed light on that a little bit. If we look at some of the drivers, why we're so focused on this today, of course, we have standards and rating systems. LEED is a big one that you hear a lot about, but there are a number of other ones, which we'll go through toward the end of the talk. We have codes now, specifications, so it's not just voluntary, it's integrated into the way buildings have to be designed per code. It's not just the building design itself, it's also purchasing and procurement. You see federal recommendations for how to pick the most sustainable products, both from an environmental standpoint and a health standpoint. And you see consumers really driving a lot of these initiatives. There's a lot more consumer awareness, there's a lot more designer awareness, and there's a lot more just consumer advocacy in general to have the most sustainable products. So that certainly affects the market for not just tile, but all building products. And of course, anytime there's a major current event, it can't be ignored because it changes the trajectory, not just of green building, but everything we're doing. But it'll be interesting to look into, particularly with green building, what kind of an impact it's having. So to piece together the puzzle a little bit, I thought it'd be interesting to show a Venn diagram. This isn't all inclusive, but these are some of the biggest puzzle pieces that came to mind as I was thinking through how to present this to you all. One of the biggest drivers, of course, are conformance and compliance. We want to make sure we're specifying sustainable products that meet codes that can benefit green building projects in terms of getting points, also meeting purchasing requirements and meeting at minimum industry standards. But what goes into that conformance and compliance are really two things. There's how products perform from an environmental standpoint, from a health standpoint, but also how products are optimizing from a health standpoint in terms of what ingredients are being used. And transparency, the subject of how forthcoming are suppliers being with the environmental impacts and the health impacts, kind of covers across, it spreads across both concepts, both environmental and health. And so all of these things really are what we've observed drive green building. You have the environmental performance of products, you have the environmental and health transparency of products, and then you have how all of these components are working together to optimize so that you're designing with the optimal solutions, both from an environmental and health standpoints. And those are really the three components of green building today: performance, transparency, and optimization. That's important because that drives our talk moving forward here. And I'll just set the stage and then let Dan take it for a while here. But we're going to walk through and show you how ceramic tile and as an industry is well positioned from a performance standpoint, both with the inherent attributes of the products as well as the minimum standards associated with the products, how we're positioned from a transparency standpoint, both environmental transparency and health transparency, and what tools are available, and also from an optimization standpoint, what resources we have in place as an industry so that manufacturers are best equipped to provide the material ingredient information necessary to meet these optimization criteria and some of these green building programs. So Dan will take it away with some of the different standards and environmental product declarations and health initiatives we have in place toward optimization. So Dan, I'll let you take control here.
Bill, can you hear me?
Thank you, Bill. Can you hear me? All right. Going to go forward as if you can hear me.
Dan, we're not hearing you. You might be on mute.
I'm not.
Dan, I can hear you.
You can hear me? So Bill, can you hear me at all?
Still not hearing you. Are you guys hearing me?
Bill, I can hear you and Dan.
All right. Well, I'm going to go forward as if you can hear me. Hopefully that'll continue to be the case.
You can see your mouse moving, Dan.
Kathy, do you think I should continue on?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to hope that everybody can hear me. I had a few little technical glitches here, but
Can hear you now.
all right, great. I will like to be the third person to wish everybody a happy National Tile Day. I know that it's good to have our own holiday. For the last few years, we've been doing that, and this is a nice kickoff to get us started. So thank you for inviting me to be part of the presentation. To really get into what my section of the presentation is, I have to give you a little bit of a history lesson. Bill talked to you about what was going on kind of behind the scenes in the country. I'm going to give you a little bit of a behind the scenes of what was going on at TCNA. So back in 2008, we sat down as a group, the Tile Council of North America, and realized that many of the sustainability programs, especially LEED, were being written by people other than us. We really didn't have representation. We didn't have our attributes being represented. So what was happening is the entire industry was moving on and having discussions about other aspects of floorings and coverings that didn't really highlight the advantages that tile has. So we started the Green Initiative Committee. Bill and I were made co-chairs of that committee to try to get the tile industry up to not just reacting to where the market was, but really starting to have those discussions about how do we improve the sustainability discussion that was going on around tile. So we came up with really 3 big areas that we had to address. Each of these were multi-year programs that took a lot of work, and I'll get into each of these aspects in more detail. But these go along with what Bill just pointed out were the building blocks, what the sustainability construction industry was looking for: the performance of the products, transparency, what we were disclosing about the products, and then how do you compare our products to others or our products to themselves. So we'll be taking a look at all 3 of those. We're going to start off with that performance part of the equation, which is our Green Squared program. Somehow, all right. So to start that discussion, we started talking about what are really the advantages of tile? What are the things that we want to have the discussion about, as opposed to, say, the vinyl industry, the carpet industry, that we're having different discussions. First, the tile industry tends to be from locally available and naturally abundant resources. So that was a big part of the discussion. Tile is inherently inert. We're firing it up to over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, so there's not a lot of chemicals to come off of tile when all said and done. Material management, it lends itself to being recycled once you're done with it. You can send it back and grind it up and put it into new tile. And then, as Bill was talking about earlier, there's this kind of this emerging idea of how does tile interact with human health and well-being? And that was a big part of the discussion too for Green Squared. Energy efficiency, I don't have, it would be nice to, I could do a whole talk on just the energy efficiency section of this, because tile absorbs a lot of energy. It's great for exterior, it's great for interior to help moderate the amount of energy used for heating and cooling, but that's only one small section of Green Squared. And then the history and the longevity. We wanted to tie in the craftsmanship of tile and also the fact that it lasts a really, really long time. We'll get into that a little bit as we start to look at the EPD information. So what emerged out of all of that was the Green Squared program. And there's 2 legs to that. One is the standard and one is the certification. We wanted to talk about standardized performance for all of these tile products, but not just tile, but also the mortars and grouts and some of the installation products that go along with it. So we did include setting materials along with that approach. The nice thing about this is really North America, all the manufacturers in North America came together to put together this multi-attribute sustainability standard. And really it's become the way that people talk about sustainability for tile, not just in the North American market, but it was also the framework that ISO is using as they develop their standard as well. So first part of Green Squared is the standard. It is an ANSI standard, A138.1, but it's actually really 5 standards, because you have the tile segment, You have the powder installation products, grouts and mortars typically. You have the paste and liquid installation products, sheet installation products, and also panels. Each one of these categories gets its own set of requirements to get certified under the Green Squared program. So it's really 5 standards in one. Why do we call it a multi-attribute certification? What are the multiple attributes that we're taking a look at? In this case, we're taking a look at product characteristics, the manufacturing of that product, the company that's making it, the corporate governance. We're adding in some points for innovation, and also we're taking a look at the end of life. So under manufacturing, you have the raw materials, you have the energy inputs, you have optimization there to try to make sure you're doing the manufacturing in a sustainable way. We look at the product itself. So we pull out things like recycled content. We talk about things like VOCs. So the product, the inherent product characteristics are discussed in ANSI 138.1. The innovation credits, there's some really neat things going on with tile right now. There are tiles that actually make your environment better than the building in which they're installed. Some of them work on ozone. Some of them actually killed microbes. So part of that germaphobia part of this whole presentation is dealt with under these innovation credits. Corporate governance, that's making sure your supply chain is doing things right with things like looking at child labor and ethically sourced materials. And then also you're doing things right. How is your corporation set up? Are you trying to optimize your sustainability function and not just kind of greenwash the whole thing? And then end of life, you take a look at things like recycling the products back in once they're done in the building. So we had our standard, we have ANSI 138.1, it's done, it's ready. Now we have to take a look at the companies that want to get their products certified. So to do that, TCNA reached out to some outside companies, one being UL Environment, another being SCS Global Services. These are certifying bodies. Their sole function is to take a look at what's in the standard, take a look at the company that wants to get their product certified, and make sure that they're walking the walk. They literally come into your facility, they'll take a look through your paperwork. I'm one of the rare people that's gone through this with 3 different companies, and I know I'm the only one that's gone through it with both the tile and an installation products company. So I can say they're rigorous. I've worked with both. These aren't just a rubber stamp type of certification. This is a real certification that says, yes, these products meet the requirements of sustainable programs. The other function that TCNA serves is kind of a touch point for all of the certifying bodies, so that they're certifying to the same thing, and also that they're interpreting the ANSI 138.1 criteria the same way. There is not only the initial certification, but there's also maintenance for that every year. We have to submit paperwork to make sure that we're still doing the things that we said we were doing initially, and then every 5 years there's a recertification. So fast forwarding to about 2012, we have the certification program, we have the standard. Now it's time to start telling the world about it. The first avenue that we explored was this greensquaredcertified.com. This is still a great touch point. If you're buying these products, if you're certifying these products, or you're specifying these products, please go to greensquaredcertified.com and poke around on there. Also, you'll start to see that Y-Tile takes a lot of this information and sends it out into the market so people can look at it. So what's in greensquaredcertified.com? If you're a manufacturer, it has details on how to get your product certified. If you're a specifier, and I know a lot of people who signed up for this were specifiers, so thank you for coming to our session. You can go to greensquaredcertified.com, find out how Green Squared products earn points and facilitate compliance to all these different programs. Bill did a ton of work trying to take a look at all the programs that are out there and see where Green Squared certification fits in to these programs to try to get your points. So there's some excellent information on there if you're working with a particular program on how Green Squared certified works. And then for purchasers, there's also a way to get from Green Squared certified products on the webpage to a database of what all those products are. And I'll explain that in a couple of slides. There there's a ton of different green programs, green construction programs out there, but for sure the best name recognition is the LEED program. Green Squared really let us get on the map with LEED. Originally, they were looking at different multi-attribute programs that didn't have anything to do with tile. We were trying to play catch up. Now, the nice thing is you can get points directly in LEED through a particular credit where 25% of all the permanently installed finishes in your building or products in your building have some kind of multi-attributes certification. One of the certifications they specifically list now is Green Squared. So this took a lot of kind of behind the scenes lobbying to get on their radar, but now we're there, they know who we are, and the tile industry has really done a really good job of working more specifically with LEED. So I told you there was a way on Green Squared Certified to see what all the products are. It's not necessarily built into the site. It's working with a third party called Ecomedes. So Ecomedes is really a database, but it's more than that. It has all of the products on it that have Green Squared certification, but it also works with catalogs to syndicate with other portals, including GSA, which is the federal program. Public universities, a lot of them are looking to Ecomedes to specify sustainable products. The Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council also has a search engine that ties in with Ecomedes. And then Ecomedes has their own catalog, as do UL Environment and SCS Global. So all these products, all of these portals are pointing back to Ecomedes and pointing back to the Green Squared Certified program. So that was one aspect of what we did. So we got up through about 2013, we had our Green Squared certification, and then LEED came out with a new version, LEED version 4. And LEED version 4 started to have some different buzzwords, some different acronyms that we had to address as an industry. Specifically, we had EPDs and HPDs. And if you've dealt with sustainability at all, you've had people ask for UPD and you've had people ask for your HPD. So what we had to do as an industry is help our members figure out how to deal with these credits. And also specifically for EPDs, there's a requirement for an industry average EPD. I apologize for all the acronyms. You just can't talk about sustainability without acronyms, but the EPD is an environmental product declaration. And it's based on a life cycle assessment. So a life cycle assessment takes a look at all the inputs into a product, all the outputs out of the product, and it really is looking at how does that product impact the environment. The LCA analysis is huge. There's a lot of information that goes into it. There's a lot of information that comes out of it, and it's very, very confusing. So what the EPD, the Environmental Product Declaration, tries to do is to turn that into some information that can easily be compared. So what you see here on the pictures is not necessarily tile, although it could be tile related, but what it is a comparison between two methods of cladding and building. So with the information in an EPD and a life cycle analysis, you can put that into the fancy software, some BIM software, and really compare, okay, method A for cladding my building, method B for cladding my building, and then interested in, for instance, energy savings, which method is going to be the one that has the best energy savings. So that's really what LEED and a lot of these sustainable programs are trying to get at, is how do I compare product A, product B, and which one's better? Everybody's definition of what better means varies, but at least the EPD gives you all the different categories so you can figure out which one you want to use and compare those. The tile industry had to do that 3 times. So what we did was not just the one for tile, but also for mortar and for grout. Again, this was unique. This is innovative. Other industries might take a look at just carpet, but not the adhesives, or just vinyl and not the adhesives that go with it. For the tile industry, we were really trying to get to that whole system. When you're installing tile, here's what the environmental product declaration looks like. So we had all 3 of these developed. This took, again, years of development work, years of working behind the scenes to come up with product category rules and some other things that had to be developed even to put out an EPD. So this The nice thing though is by doing both tile, mortar, and grout, you're getting 3 times the bang for your buck. The way the LEED credit is written, you have to have a certain number of products, you have to have a certain number of manufacturers, and now just by using a tile system, you're bringing in 3 of those instead of just 1. Taking a look at the mortar EPD, you see all the big names in mortar manufacturing in North America were represented. It's the generic cement mortar for tile installation. So by putting all of the mortar manufacturers, getting information from them, TCNA acted as the clearinghouse. So mortar manufacturer A wasn't seeing the information from mortar manufacturer B, but at the end of the day, there could be an industry average effort, which then we could compare individual products to later on. Same with grout. The same companies that worked with the mortar EPD also work with grout. You're trying to get to that environmental footprint of what goes into making a grout and using a grout. And also the same thing for tile. So you can see there the list of all the tile companies that participated. So all these companies now can use this industry average information when they compare their specific products to try to get more points under the LEED program and other green programs as well. I won't spend a ton of time. I know this is a kind of a lot of small print on this, but there are a couple things I'll bring out. One, these are the actual EPDs. So what you're seeing is all that information that goes into the life cycle analysis has been distilled down to the same units, the same categories, and you can now start to compare item A to item B. The other thing I'll point out is these are based on 75-year impacts. So what this is assuming is that if you install tile in your building, 75 years later, that tile is still going to be there in pretty much the same condition as when you first installed it. This is different than other flooring manufacturers because their products are designed with maybe a 20-year life or even less. So how does tile measure up? Glad you asked. We've got here is a comparison of just one of those elements of the EPD, the global warming potential. And kind of the idea everybody had in the back of their head is because you have to heat tile up to 2000 degrees Fahrenheit or even more, and then cool it back down, that there's a huge global warming potential because of all the gas or other, maybe even electric it takes to heat it up and then cool it back down. But what you find is, as you start to compare the numbers, that's not really what's going on. Because vinyl and carpet have to be replaced regularly, because there is a lot of energy that goes into them, a lot of petroleum that goes into those products, the global warming potential for those products is actually quite a bit higher, orders of magnitude higher in some cases than that for tile. So you really start to get the numbers so you can do an accurate comparison between item A and item B when you're doing your building. All right, so we've got our green square certification. We have our industry average EPDs in a way for people or the tile companies and the mortar and grout companies to get to their product specific EPDs. Those were relatively straightforward. They took a lot of time, it took a lot of data, but there was a blueprint that had already been figured out to get there. Now we started to get into the material ingredients section of it. And material ingredients and the whole idea of transparency of what goes into products, it was a mess. Under version 4, even under version 4.1 of LEED, they had the words in there, you know, health product declarations, HPDs, but they don't really have the framework for how to get there. There's some quotes on this slide from the Healthy Building Network, which really looks at occupant health inside a building. So what they want to do is transform the market for building materials to advance the best environmental, health, and social outcomes. They want the buildings to really, the products that you choose to put in your building to actually benefit the building inhabitant if they can. So there's a right to know section of this. There's a responsibility for the manufacturer to disclose this, and it all kind of boils down to that idea of transparency. I can tell you, being in a manufacturer, there are certain parts to our compositions of our products, so we don't necessarily want everybody to know. It's not really a transparency issue. It's really trying to be a competitive issue, because those are the secret sauce that makes the products work. So a lot of that had to be juggled to get to this industry average idea, especially for ingredient disclosure and transparency. But we didn't really have a choice, because architects and end users were starting to demand that we had this information. So a few years back, 30 major architectural firms all got together, compared notes, and said, hey, we want this disclosure info, we want this transparency info. And they sent out letters to all their suppliers saying, look, if you don't give us what we're asking for, we're not going to use you anymore. We're going to delete you from our catalogs. And that was really a shot across the bow of the tile industry that, hey, we have to get our acts together and start giving them the information they're looking for in a format that they can use. And it wasn't just the architects. There was a lot of confusion around how do you bundle up this information in a way that people can consume it and understand it. You've got things like the well building red list, green screen, which pulls from a number of different sources as it takes a look at individual ingredients, cradle to cradle, and then the other column you see their health certificate that comes out of the cradle to cradle list. There's just lots of what I'll call red lists out there, products of components, what people don't want to see in particular products. Some of those are governmental, some of those are non-governmental, but there's hundreds of them. So somehow you have to make some noise out of all this chaos. So to do that, there's a bunch of different methods. Health Product Declaration probably has the best name recognition, the HPD, because of LEED's credit. But LEED's credit also allows you to do your own green screen, so you don't necessarily have to do an HPD specifically. Declare labels also very similar to HPD, and the declare label is trying to get the information in a form that people can easily digest and compare. Manufacturer inventory is kind of the starting point, the jumping off point for most of these other standards. And that ties in with the USGBC program, but also there's Product Lens. Google has their own way for Google buildings that they're evaluating products that are going into those buildings. Mindful Materials has a list. So you can see there's a lot to this whole transparency and chemical ingredient disclosure that we had to get into. And because this is kind of an emerging field, and this is kind of where we're at right now, and I brought you up to speed and from 2008 to current, I'm going to hand it back over to Bill. He's going to talk to you about where we've come with this transparency and ingredient disclosure.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Let me get into kind of where we're going. Let me address it really briefly, a question that came in, touching on, we're providing a lot of information about green squared and how that helps with LEED and EPDs, which is true. That's an important piece of this as we're wrapping our minds around the landscape of sustainability. As we previously discussed, there's the environmental performance side, there's the environmental transparency side, and now as Dan has set the stage, there's the material ingredient transparency side. And admittedly, it is very LEED focused because USGBC has taken a lot of initiative in these arenas. But I should note it's not just LEED. There are many other, as I mentioned previously, green globes, federal purchasing requirements, building codes, etc. And should also mention, green squared has gotten us to where we are today based on our American national standard, ANSI A1381. But we should also note this is a huge international discussion, and as international needs evolve, international stakeholders come into the mix, and international standards ultimately get written around sustainability, we're in great position in the North American market because we have something to grow and take into account a lot of the international interests. And so that's kind of where we're heading there on the environmental front, and even more significantly on the material ingredient front. We're at a very important transition point now because the tile industry discussed what we needed with regards to material ingredients, and the last slide Dan showed, should give everyone a headache when you look at just all these lists, all of these requirements for reporting, whether it's HPD, declare label, manufacturer material ingredient inventory. There's all kinds of options out there. So one thing was clear to the tile industry to make it as painless as possible to specify tile to meet material transparency needs. we needed to assess all these ingredients all in one place, create an inventory of the ingredients most commonly used by tile manufacturers and grout and mortar manufacturers, have that all in one place so everyone's referencing the same info. Have some industry leadership around, holding everyone on the same level of what the expectations are on what they should be reporting in their ingredients. So there's some uniformity in this marketplace presentation. Also, so that everyone's providing the correct information to maximize compliance opportunities and LEED and well building and some of the other programs. But very importantly, to add context around what we're reporting. Just because we're, for example, reporting silica as a main ingredient in many of these products, obviously you're going to be flagged with all the carcinogenic undertones of silica, but the real conversation is once it's fused into a ceramic matrix or once it's cured in a mortar, what's the real attribute of that material in terms of how it affects the building occupant. And so that's why at an industry level, we needed to put this all out there, not hide from the ingredients, because there's a lot of naturally occurring ingredients that are inherently used by the industry. And so start the conversation on, what you need to be paying attention to, why some things are relevant to building occupants and why some things are not. So the bottom line is we needed a unified approach to telling the story about the material ingredients associated with the industry, and a less complicated approach to provide this information to the market, so that we don't reinvent the wheel and ultimately add cost to the manufacturers and cost to the products. And so that was our challenge. And what was our answer? We announced several months ago that we developed a material ingredient initiative where we did what's called a green screen toxicological assessment of all the materials, most of the materials used by the North American industry. And we have that all in one place so that manufacturers, when they're reporting on this information, can draw from that database and all report consistently what the ingredients are and what the attributes of those ingredients are from a health standpoint. Also, by conducting these assessments using green screen, it addresses a lot of the criteria required in these green building programs. They don't want just the information, they want to know that the information has been green screen assessed. And so this information is all being held centrally, and we'll continue to add to it as products continue to evolve. But it's really a milestone because we're the first industry of any to do this and to undertake this initiative. And already we're seeing other industries take our lead. And so I think in the future, you're going to see these centralized databases of industry ingredient information where it's possible, where industries share a lot of the common ingredients. In the future, you're going to see a lot of this kind of inventory and taking place. So it's excited to see where this takes us and what other industries follow suit. The key, as I mentioned, project deliverable is that library of green screen assessments, 34 ingredients most commonly used by North American tile manufacturer and grout, tile, mortar, and grout manufacturers. And the participating companies in this project are represent a large portion of the North American producers, as you see listed on the screen. So I anticipate that these companies are going to be pretty uniform in the way that they're presenting material ingredient information moving forward. And just to give you an idea, here's an example of a disclosure from Dan's company, Iron Rock, but this is referencing the ingredients that go into the product. It's also referencing the benchmark, green screen benchmark score, which has been attributed to each ingredient. And this kind of uniform presentation, designers will be able to have a familiarity, because Iron Rock's report will be different, or will be similar to other manufacturers' reports, with the only difference being the ingredients reported, but they'll all be presented in this way so you can get an idea of what those benchmark scores are. And by having those benchmark scores, you'll be able to optimize based on those green building requirements. This is the future. I think you're going to see a lot more of this in this uniform presentation. And just to give you an example now of how we have moved along with our green screen assessments, Dan talked about our standards with Green Squared, talked about our industry available environmental product declarations. So I'm going to just take a few moments to walk through the different programs, not just LEED, but others, and how these different tools, again, you have performance tools with the standard, you have transparency tools with 3 EPDs for tile, mortar, and grout. You'll have transparency tools with material ingredient reporting, which double as optimization tools, which I'll get into in a moment. So these tools can be used across green building programs, but also to meet building codes and also to meet purchasing specifications based on recommendations from the EPA. So let me just run through these and then we'll get more into the future. First, starting with LEED, I don't want to spend too much time because Dan already touched on how green squared gets a point recognition in LEED if a certain number of certified products are used, particularly green squared for tile, mortar, and grout, and other insulation materials, but also the EPDs are referenced in LEED, as are the material ingredient criteria. So you'll see much more of these material ingredient reports with the green screen benchmarks be required for green building projects, and manufacturers will have the information now to optimize in those material ingredient credits. Similarly with green globes, which is more common in the Pacific Northwest and also in Canada, you'll see green squared referenced in green globes, as you will our EPDs. Those are both available for contribution to points. Then we look at building codes, the International Green Construction Code and the ASHRAE 189.1 standard, which merged just a couple of years ago into one framework building code. As you see these codes adopted by municipalities across the US, and you go through their criteria, you'll see some of the criteria are for certified sustainable products, which Green Squared is one of the programs listed that represents the tile sector. And there are also requirements for availability of EPDs. So not just from earning points in LEED and green globes, you'll see it perhaps written in, perhaps you're already starting to see it written into building codes that in order to meet a code requirement, you'll need to provide this information on behalf of the products being used. On the residential side, there's a standard called the National Green Building Standard, which about 10 years ago, NAHB took on this initiative to develop this standard. And pretty much from the beginning, Green Squared was referenced on as the tile standard for sustainable products, and life cycle information, and more recently EPDs were referenced. So this is kind of like LEED. You can get points on projects pursuing certification to the NAHB's National Green Building Standard. Then a few years back, you saw the EPA come out with federal purchasers recommendations for what standards and labels need to be used in the procurement of sustainable products. And the industry was heavily involved in the flooring panel that helped EPA develop these recommendations. So Green Squared is recommended by the US EPA and all US government sustainable purchasing initiatives. So you may have already seen this show up, particularly if you're involved in government projects, and you also see Green Squared written into the GSA facility standard, the P100 standard. So I'll tell you all of that to highlight that we're well positioned today, and we're also well positioned for the future, because our tools in place address transparency with our EPDs and our material ingredient framework, performance with our minimum standard Green Squared, as it will continue to evolve as international criteria get developed. We'll see our US standards evolve because recognize that there are a lot of imported products in the US market. And of course, with our health ingredient transparency initiative, not just the disclosure of ingredients, but the uniformity and the precedent the industry is setting to be able to provide this information consistently with all of the benchmark scores required for those optimization credits. So this is all very encouraging. We were well positioned. We got ourselves to this point, and then something happened called COVID-19, and it kind of made us rethink what this means for sustainability. And we're still in the middle of it, so I don't want to claim to have all of the answers, but let me just give you a little taste of how this has been impacting the tile industry and how that has carried over into sustainability considerations. First and foremost, at TCNA, in addition to the work we do in standards and the work we do in representing the industry and a lot of A&D type initiatives, we also have a very active product performance testing lab. And starting around the middle of the pandemic, we started to see a large influx, a significant, I don't want to underestimate, it was a significant, or under a report, it was a significant influx of testing requests on how long viruses live on surfaces. And because we have a extensive background in microbiology testing, and we were equipped to do testing not just for the flooring industry, but also sanitary ware, textiles, plastics, even rail car interiors and food prep area suppliers. And we also tested disinfectants and cleaning agents. So it was clear there's a heavy demand for the antiviral properties of materials in general. And what we learned in doing all this is there is a huge disconnect between building experts and microbiologists. Believe it or not, there's no consensus standard on evaluating the efficacy of antiviral surfaces and agents. There's no standards for determining how long viruses live on surfaces. So a lot of the infographics you see in the news are based on variations in research from different labs. So there's no real consistent source of information for all of this. And so what we learned was through the work we were doing, we can start to connect the dots a little bit, help develop these answers, find out just how many products we need to test to get the confidence to find some, to develop some insights into how effective are coatings against those ones that have been used for years on antimicrobials in general. How do those work against surrogate strains of the SARS-CoV-2 virus? Inherent glazing components, how are those effective? We found that some of the metals already in glazes are effective in shortening the survival rate of viruses and sometimes being antiviral, having antiviral properties. So we were developing a lot of insights. We've been involved at the standards within different standards committees. And because of these tests, we're really starting to gain experience and help lead new efforts to develop test methods for virus survival. This is just the tip of the iceberg here. We anticipate a lot more research, a lot more testing, because how this translates into sustainability and green building, we certainly anticipate that designers and specifiers, if we have the standards and the capability to test, we meaning interior surface labs and industries in general, certainly we're going to see requirements for this information so that the right products can be used in the right areas, especially those that we come into contact with every day. In fact, you're already starting to see it. USGBC, shortly after the onset of the pandemic, developed COVID-19 resources on how to specify safe interiors that minimize the transmission of virus spread. One of the components of this safe specification had to do with the cleanability of surfaces and the impact of cleaners, not just the impact of cleaners, but what surfaces can be easily cleaned and wiped down, and how well those surfaces can be cleaned from an antiviral efficacy standpoint. And so you saw this very early on carry into 2 new LEED credits, both called Safety First, one on cleaning and disinfecting your space, which admittedly is very ambiguous in what the requirements are. It's just a starting point. But one consistent thread is in there is for LEED projects now, you're going to start to see specification of products that can be easily cleaned, easily disinfected, and also have the durability to withstand more stringent cleaning regimens. And you're going to see an impact on re-entering your workspace, how spaces are designed to minimize human-to-human contact, how to minimize contact with surfaces. So this is just really, again, this is a blank canvas to rethink how we're designing spaces and the products we're using in those spaces when building reoccupancy continues to increase. So you're going to see these carry on into LEED projects, and I truly anticipate that for years to come, this subject of virus transmission will be yet another component of all things green building, not just the LEED rating system, but codes and standards and others rating systems as well. So I want to close out the conversation today by just drawing your attention to some of the very valuable resources we have related to the pandemic, or inspired by the pandemic, I should say. We developed a whole section on our on the ceramic tile industry's Why Tile site, which includes a hygiene guide, which really just walks through some of the different health and hygiene advantages of tile, cleaning guides to tile, some of the different properties of tile and how they translate to antimicrobial issues, antibacterial issues, antiviral issues, also just inherent things that have been around forever, like VOCs. And then if you start talking about product ingredients, there's a lot of health and hygiene information. Without reading through the bullet point list here, I encourage you to check out the Why Tile site to learn more about tile's role on the health and hygiene side of things. And also on whytile.com, you'll find a resource library that has, really in a nutshell, all of the ground we covered today. We have a lot of publications and resources to where, we covered a lot of ground. So if you want to read more in depth on our different standards, our different tools, certifications available, not just US transparency reports, but also the Italian and the Spanish sectors had environmental product declarations as well. So there's a lot of information there. And Dan was joking a while ago about all of the different acronyms and industry jargon, we'll call it, associated with green building. It gets confusing. So there's a lot of terms and definitions on the site that may help you kind of remind yourself what all these words mean, how they're defined. And one of the more handy tools that we offer is just a spread of all of the inherent properties of tile, sustainability properties, and how they kind of work into the different building standards and rating systems. And as these standards, whether it's LEED, building codes, Green Building Standard, or Green Globes, and a number of others, as they continue to evolve, this chart gets updated every year. So this is a quick, handy way to reference, what attributes you're seeking and how they are recognized across the different programs and standards. Again, so just highlighting some of the sustainability specific publications. We have an extensive guide to Green Squared. We have an extensive guide to EPDs. Soon we'll have an extensive guide to the material ingredient initiative we laid out, but also a guide to LEED. Again, this is where we are today, and this will continue to evolve, and we anticipate a lot more resources in the years ahead as the sustainability landscape continues to grow, and as we enter into that landscape new components of sustainability, including health and hygiene related issues. So I will leave it at that. That's where we are today, and I think at this stage, Dan, if you had anything else to add, or if we want to entertain questions, we got just a couple minutes. We can entertain some questions.
No, I'm good. Let's see if there's any questions, Bill.
So far, no questions, because you guys gave such a great presentation. We'll give it maybe one more minute just to make sure, and then we'll go ahead and close out. And obviously, Dan and Bill have provided their email addresses on the screen, so you can reach out to them directly as well. All right, we're gonna take it home. Thank you so much, Bill and Dan, for a terrific presentation. On behalf of Coverings Connected, thank you so much for joining us. Once you leave today's webinar, you will receive a survey on the presentation, and we would appreciate it if you would complete it and provide your feedback. We hope you enjoy the rest of the day's events and will join us for our next Coverings Connected on April 28th, and then in person in Orlando from July 7th through 9th. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.